Hey, what is up everyone? Welcome back to Life on the Wrist. Hope you all are doing well today. We're going to be looking at a real icon of a watch. We're going to be looking at a Rolex Submariner reference 14060M. This is obviously a very important part of the history of the Rolex Submariner, and dare I say, Rolex in general. A lot of people refer to this as one of the best last Rolex Submariner models that was released. It's total personal opinion, but I do think that it's a pleasure to wear on the wrist. So I'll give you some history about this reference, and you'll be able to see this watch on my wrist and sort of in the metal, and I'll play around with this so you can see how this watch works. I know that people talk about one watch collections, but if you had to have a one watch collection, I think this is probably where a lot of people would end up, just because if you have a one watch collection, you're really not looking for a whole lot else, and I think this really does tick a lot of the boxes. So very excited to jump into this. I'll give you a quick close-up there of it. Very excited to jump into it with you. So without further ado, let's get into it. The Rolex Submariner hardly needs an introduction, even to those who may not be watch enthusiasts or really into watch collecting. The Submariner is obviously one of the world's first dive watches and has become a real icon in the design of dive watches for Rolex and the watches that they've created. But you could also say just for watches in general. I'm sure you've probably been watching some sort of cartoon where you see a character who's supposed to be wearing a nice watch. Maybe it's an individual who is trying to be perceived as being wealthy, and a lot of the times you'll see some sort of caricature of a Rolex Submariner on their wrist. Because of sort of the iconic nature of the Submariner and how in demand these watches are, Rolex typically really doesn't make a lot of modifications to these watches at a very rapid pace. You'll notice that since its launch in 1953 with the Rolex Submariner, Rolex really hasn't changed the design too heavily of the Submariner. Really, they're looking to make iterations on the design that they have created, and use that as the benchmark for future iterations. Many believe that the reference 14060 is known by many collectors as being one of the best models produced, being that it really best modern versions of this reference ever produced. This really is obviously a personal preference thing, but a lot of the design aesthetics is what people love. So before the 14060M, the reference 14060 was released. It was released in 1990 after Rolex discontinued the reference 5513, which is obviously an extremely collectible watch. The 14060 really was an effort to sort of a stepping stone to modernizing the Rolex Submariner into sort of what it is today. The watch came with the caliber 3000 movement, which at the time was actually one of the less expensive. Let me just clean the crystal for you all. Was one of the less expensive versions. This was the first No. 8 Submariner to have a sapphire crystal and a triplock crown, which made sure that the water resistance could increase from 300 meters to 300 meters, which is 1,000 feet. Before, the 5513 was only water resistant up to 200 meters. The watch, like you see on this 14060M, was referred to as a two-liner, which refers to the text that you see at the below 12 o'clock here, as opposed to what is known as a four-liner, where you actually have chronometer certification written underneath the two lines, which makes it have 4 lines below the 12 o'clock. In 1999, Rolex then released the 14060M, which is the reference that you're looking at right here, and this was the M sort of signified modified, which was referring to some of the modifications that they made to the original 14060 to sort of modernize it. So first, instead of having the caliber 300, which had a lot of sort of missing elements, they upgraded to the caliber 3130, which was a version of the 3135, just excluding the date. it had been, the 3135 had been used in Rolex Submariner date versions up in, since 1988. Many of the elements of the movement were upgraded, namely the Breguet overcoil. They also added a larger balance wheel, and they also replaced the balance cock with a bridge for better stability. They also upgraded the luminescent material used on the hands and the hour indicators from tritium to luminova. If you look at this watch when it's on the wrist, you really realize how good of design the Rolex Submariner is. I would say that I have smaller wrists, but I think this fits my wrist really, really well. You can see the height of it isn't, it's not too, doesn't sit too wide on my wrist. You can see the lugs actually fit really perfectly. You can see the height of the watch isn't super big, so it doesn't feel like you're wearing a TV on your wrist. The only thing that I would say, the 14060 is the bracelet. I think that's a common thing. Bracelet does feel a little bit, the quality of the bracelet feels a little bit different than maybe the modern bracelets that are used. That is just an evolution of Rolex though that you'll have to deal with. But I do think it looks really, really nice. The crown is quite big. The crown guards are quite large, but I actually think it gives the watch a little bit of heft. Now, when it comes to the debate of whether 2-line or 4-liners are better, it's really personal preference. Do you like uncluttered dials on your no-date subs? Then I think a 2-liner would work a little bit better. If you like to have that chronometer certification written on the dial, that's your own sort of opinion. I will say if you prefer an uncluttered dial though, this watch is probably where you want to land without the date. And having 2 lines, I do think it is a preference to have even less on the dial itself. Thought I was getting better at the focus, but of course not. I will get there eventually. But it's the screw down crown is really easy to use. If we kind of go towards the use, really easy to use. No issues with setting the watch really. It's a pleasure to really use. Screw down crown. I'll also turn the bezel so you can hear it. Turn here. Practically no wiggle as well. So one of the other reasons why Rolex Submariners are so iconic is how easy they are to use, and essentially the perfect dive watch in one. And that's kind of why a lot of the watches that have been released by Rolex have similar aesthetics to this, is because it really is almost the perfect watch. So, sort of, whether you're a vintage enthusiast or not, or if you're a vintage enthusiast, if you're a modern watch enthusiast, the Rolex Submariner obviously is kind of up to personal opinion, but whatever your thoughts are on whether this is the best last Rolex Submariner, I think it's, again, personal opinion. But if you do plan on wearing a Rolex Submariner, I know that it's going to be a feeling where you have to have, that will say that you have an icon on the wrist, and it will live on longer than you'll be on this earth. Probably your kids will be on this earth, because as long as Rolex continues with the aesthetics that they have on this watch, they're going to have a winner when it comes to watches. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at the Rolex Submariner reference 14060M. It really is a beautiful watch. I mentioned in the introduction, but if you need one watch for your collection, this pretty much ticks all the boxes, especially in a the modern world, where if you're not looking to have a dress watch be your only watch, but hey, who knows, it might be your aesthetic. Depends on who you are and what you're interested in. As always, I will have an article on lifeonthewrist.com for you to read if you want to read some more about this watch. There will be some pictures there as well if you want to take a look at it there. So head over to lifeonthewrist.com. You can go to the editorial section of our website, or you can just search the website for the Rolex 14060M. If you are new to Life on the Wrist, welcome. We'd love to have you part of the family, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this with a friend who might be interested in watches. Also, let me know what you think about the 14060M. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is this the one Rolex Submariner that you would have in your collection, or would you have something else? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, date, no date, let me know. And if you wouldn't mind liking this video, it really does help me out. With this said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time.